Hello friends, I want to discuss a concern here today about undertaking a kind of early Buddhist path as a layperson. Because I think this is a question that many of us may have, a question that arose from one of my person commenting on a prior video of mine, which might be of interest to you. If you're new to this channel, by the way, and interested in living a wiser and a kinder and a calmer life, consider subscribing to this channel and click that bell down below if you want to receive notifications when I come out with new videos. So I had a comment a while back by one of my viewers who raised, I think, a very important and trenchant point that I think many people, many of you might have similar kinds of ideas about when it comes to practicing along a kind of an early Buddhist path. And what he said, this is a comment by Tom Feller, he said, "Hi Doug, this teaching has always created a challenge for me. My family and loved ones have a great value to me. If I can never reach enlightenment without abandoning my commitment to family, then is that a realistic choice? Would the world really be better if no one ever got married or had children or never held jobs or never produced food? It seems that these kind of restrictions are part of the monastic path, but I'm not sure that everyone can or should follow the monastic path. But can the Dharma, the raft, bring us to a better place?" Now this is a wonderful comment. As I say, I think many of you might have similar questions or concerns. Or if you haven't thought about this yet, I think if you look into early Buddhism deeper, you probably these concerns will come up at some point. So what I want to do in this video is first look at an answer to this question from a kind of an early Buddhist perspective, and then I want to turn to a kind of a broader perspective as well, because I think that also could potentially be helpful. First, from the point of view of an early Buddhist practice. In early Buddhism, there really was a very bright line between monastics on the one hand and lay followers on the other. The Buddha well understood that lay followers had great fondness and affection and attachment to their families, to their friends, their spouses, perhaps their children. That lay people had great fondness and attachment to their wealth, to their jobs, to their houses, their other things that they own, as well as to their ability to create wealth, their ability perhaps to help other people. Because after all, most things that people do to create wealth, to have jobs and livelihoods, most things that people do in that respect are helpful. Now, that's the reason they're able to make a livelihood out of it, because people are helped by it and willing to pay for it. And the Buddha absolutely understood that. And indeed, many of these jobs make lives better for people and make lives easier. And so I did an earlier video on Buddhism and ambition, which I'll leave a link to down below, where I discussed this question about, whether it's possible to have sort of greater ambitions for regular life within a Buddhist context. And the answer in general is yes, although there's a bunch of topics I tried to take in that video. But in any event, the general idea here is that there's nothing wrong with having that kind of attachment as a layperson within a Buddhist context. And indeed, it's necessary if we're going to make the wealth, we're going to pile up to whatever small extent we can, in order to have some extra to give to the Sangha. Because the Sangha relied, that is to say the monastics, the monks and nuns, relied upon donations from the lay followers in order to feed themselves. They were not allowed to, from monastic law, not allowed to feed themselves, not allowed to clothe themselves. So they relied upon the laity for their food, their clothing, their lodging, their medicine, any number of things. And in order for that to be possible, it required a laity that was successful, at least to an extent. So it was never the case in early Buddhism that the Buddha expected everyone to become a monastic, and indeed that would not be workable. They would all eventually starve at some point, and actually relatively quickly if everyone became a monastic. So the Buddha never intended everyone to be a monastic. He expected that there to be a distinction. And on a traditional understanding, we are reborn into future lives. And so the Buddha's idea was that people who were lay people could, if they did well, gain the karma necessary to be reborn into a future life in which perhaps they could become monastics. So there was always a future path for a layperson, even within, or I should say within future lives. Now, even if we're going to set that aside as speculative, and so we don't know whether that's going to happen or not, we don't know about future lives, so that's not really on our table. Even if we're going to set that aside, still, the path of practice that the Buddha sets out for us is a long-term gradual path, and one that we can, even within a lay context, make a lot of progress in our lifetime. I did an earlier video also on Anathapindika, who was a very famous lay donor to the Buddhist Sangha, and he, and indeed many other lay people in the Buddha's day, actually got quite far along this path before they passed away. Which is to say that even within that lay life, we have family, we have friends, we have possessions, wealth. Even within that lay context, we can do quite a bit. We can make our lives better, our lay lives better, simply by following the three basic ingredients found in the Eightfold Path, that is, ethics, meditation, and wisdom. So for ethics, we can strive not to harm other people, to be as kind as we can, to be compassionate. That way, we're going to make our lives better immediately. If we've been harming people in the past, we're going to make our lives better by stopping that and make the lives of those around us better. That is pretty clear and obvious. If we undertake some meditative practice, we can calm ourselves, calm the mind down, see our lives better. Simply by calming down, we automatically reduce stress that we have, which makes our lives better, makes us better able to see where we are in our lives, which means being able to see more clearly what we should and shouldn't be doing, which also makes our lives better and easier right here, right now. And if we're going to be pursuing wisdom, well, that's going to help us to see and understand the changeable nature of everything that surrounds us, so that we'll be ready when things change and not be so prone, perhaps, to cling to things that we know are not going to last forever. It's going to help us to see that things are not who we are, that the world that surrounds us is not ourself, and so lessen our tendency to identify with things that really aren't who we are, and to understand that the world is going to let us down in various ways. It's not perfect. It's not a perfect kind of refuge for us. And these all involve us clinging less to many of the features that tend to surround us in daily life, in particular to aspects of what are known as the worldly winds, which I did an earlier video on. I'll leave a link to that down below. The worldly winds of gain, that is to say, making money, of fame, of becoming famous, of praise, of looking for praise among others, and for pleasure, looking for pleasurable experiences. These worldly winds, they blow both directions. So one day we're being praised, the other day we're being blamed. One day we're gaining money, the other day we're losing, and so on. And if we stop clinging to these as our final goal, again, most people do tend to cling to these as their final goal, the person who dies with the most toys wins kind of thinking. But if we stop clinging to these as our final goal, I think we'll find our lives much better. And indeed, even by clinging to people who are closest to us, our family and friends, less than we do before, we'll find our lives better in that respect too. Now, as I think it was Tom said at the beginning, we tend to cling to our family and friends. We love them. Absolutely normal, absolutely understandable. But there are respects in which that clinging can become suffocating for them and for us too. And that true kindness and love in a deeper sense, I think, involves allowing other people to be who they are, which can involve, for some of us anyway, a relaxing around that kind of clinging, to encompass a more expansive kind of kindness and love that allows people to be who they are. And I also discussed that in a prior video, which I'll also leave down below in the notes in case you're interested in hearing more about that. But in any event, look, I'm a layperson as well. I love my family and my friends. I don't have any interest in giving them up and becoming a monastic. But even so, there's an awfully large amount that we can do within this very life to make our lives better using the ideas from early Buddhism. Now, second, I want to turn to the broader picture here, which is that in the millennia-long history of Buddhism after the Buddha's lifetime, much of the turn of Buddhist thinking, particularly in the Mahayana, has been away from this kind of monastic ideal of retiring away from the ordinary world and pursuing enlightenment as a monastic, as a monk, and instead towards more of a closer interaction with the lay community. That came about because of the ideals within Mahayana Buddhism, what's called the Bodhisattva ideal, where one aims to become a full Buddha rather than simply an awakened being. Now, I'm not going to get into the distinction here, that's a big distinction, but in any event, the point is that the path at that point becomes much longer. If we're going to go all the way to Buddhahood, we're going to need eons and eons, on a traditional understanding, eons and eons of lifetimes of practice to get there, because it's such a huge goal. And as a result, from within that tradition, that sort of tradition, the goal fades into the distance. And so the idea of maintaining a monastic lifestyle right here and right now becomes somewhat less important. Now, that's not to say that we wouldn't have necessarily points of breakthrough within our ordinary life, what is known in Japanese as satori, for example, in the Zen tradition. We may have these moments of breakthrough from time to time, but the path itself is extremely long and not one that we can come to any kind of, not the one that we can expect to end anytime soon. And as a result, the possibility of having a family, a lay life, becomes less problematic. And so, for example, we see some Zen priests who were married, because within the Zen tradition it was perfectly okay for a Zen priest to be married, in a way that it's not okay within the early monastic tradition to have any kind of sexual relations at all. Now, as a secular practitioner, I find it somewhat difficult to embrace such a path, simply because I set aside the question of future rebirths. I don't know that they're going to happen. What I see is this life, and that's all that I see. But for many people, the Mahayana path and this view of a long-term future of many, many, many rebirths, they see that, and maybe you do, see that as alluring, as the sort of thing that you want to consider. And that if you do, that takes the pressure off, as it were, within this lifetime, and you can pursue a Buddhist practice while seeing a goal that's quite a ways in the distance. That's perfectly fine. And I think either way, no matter how we practice, the important thing is to have the same kinds of goals, the goals of kindness, of compassion, of reducing stress, of becoming calmer, of trying to become wiser, improve the wisdom that we have in our vision of the world, that is to say, a kinder, a more compassionate, and more incisive vision of the way things really are. And in that regard, I think it's helpful to look at the early understanding of what's called the gradual path, or the gradual progress along that path. Because the way the Buddha described practice is as gradual, that practice is gradual. And I have an earlier video on that topic, and I'll leave a link to it up here on the screen if you haven't seen it already. Thanks so much to all of you. If you want to help us out, consider checking out my Patreon page. It's linked down below. We'll catch you on the next video, and meanwhile, all of you, be well.